related to the development of ASM, which will be followed by a presentation by the representative of European Union in Côte d'Ivoire, who will be making a detailed presentation of the new law being validated in Europe on the requirement for importing gold in the European Union, based on the due diligence practices and system. Thereafter, two presentations from the sub-region, one from Niger and other one from Benin, who will be sharing the outlooks, the situation of ASM in their country, and another presentation by OECD focusing on the due diligence guidance, which training was delivered 2 days ago. So he will be taking you through the system, showing you the highlight. These are the presentation before the coffee break. When we come from the coffee break, the third panel will deal with the strategy of formalization, with presentation of case studies, practical studies, with techniques, strategies. The first thing is, how do we get these professions better organized, and with a special focus on what we said yesterday, meaning that we should focus, we take into account all the links of the value chain and how particularly the due diligence guide of OECD is doing it. In the afternoon, last panel will be established based on the in which we see how we can go to what a regional harmonized strategy, and the experience of BTF in other countries will be presented, as those countries, these stakeholders have a good deal of experience in the subject matter. So these are the agenda items of the second day. I hope will be insightful as the yesterday. On this, I will call on the first presenters to come and make a presentation on the optimal approaches for the development of ASM. Who am I? My name is Estelle Nabilani. I'm working on ASM since 2003. I have established my company called Social Venture. I'm working with 15 people in English in Singapore, and I have partnership across the world and in Africa, with few partners in this country. We're helping customer transform the mineral sector. We are doing it by 3 channels: good governance, better business, the impact and innovation. These are a few services we're doing in Mozambique and Mongolia. and speaking to our contacts there. Should we carry on in English? How do I perceive the world? My mission today is to take your thought high. We are all in playing our role. We know what we are doing. But to approach this sector, this challenging sector, it will be good to see them from the crowd. The first thing, the minerals are transforming the badly and goodly, the bad way and the good way, the society. So, but we want to see the sunny side of this story. Tara, tell me when I can shift into English. The second thing is minerals very complicated. It's complex and dynamic. To understand it, we need to see from multiple perspectives. But we have an issue. Each is trapped in its own ideology. This means that we have the experience in order to get ready for something specialized. But this remains an issue because we need to raise from our own experience and put ourselves in the experience on the other. This is what Mike said yesterday.
Ouais, merci à Tara.
D'accord, je vais un peu jouer le rôle de traducteur pour 5 minutes, même si elle se débrouille très bien en français.
Pas si bien. Je n'ai pas préparé en français. Ça fait longtemps que je l'ai utilisé bien. Bon, so in English, what I'm trying to say is many of us are trapped inside our own ideologies, our own ways of seeing, and that becomes a barrier to progress.
Donc, très souvent, dans ça arrive? Non, mais tout le monde n'a pas les écouteurs. Ah. Voilà, je vais juste continuer. Donc, ce qu'elle disait, c'est que dans le discours portant sur l'arsène minier, le cadre de comment on cadre et voir le phénomène, parfois on est piégé par notre façon de voir la chose. Donc parfois il faut réfléchir à d'autres manières de voir ce phénomène.
And something Mark said yesterday that rings true for me and is something we focus on is that the answers to problems happen at the conflict zones between different ways of seeing.
Et une chose que Marc hier a soulevé, qu'elle a marqué en particulièrement, c'est parfois les réponses à ces problèmes et ces grands défis de l'arsenal minier arrivent lorsqu'on est confronté à différentes façons de voir le phénomène, différentes perspectives.
And so ultimately, for solutions to be sustainable, they have to reconcile different values and beliefs.
Pour que les solutions à ces défis soient durables, il faut pouvoir réconcilier les différentes valeurs, les différentes priorités que chacun apporte.
And that's why it's important to step up and out from what we're used to and try and look from other people's point of view.
Et c'est pour ça que c'est très important que chacun puisse comprendre le phénomène de d'autres points de vue et des points de vue des autres. Une autorité qui peut comprendre du point de vue des artisans miniers, un artisan minier d'un point de vue autorité, etc.
Merci, Thierry. So what do I want to achieve today? Sorry, it's taken a long time to get to this first slide. What I want to do is help you think about what more you could do in your position, in your role in the mineral system, to drive positive change in this challenging sector.
Donc l'objectif de son intervention ce matin, c'est de pouvoir vous offrir certaines pistes de réflexion sur comment améliorer et comment trouver des solutions à travers différentes manières de réfléchir et différents processus de réflexion.
Is your understanding of your role too confined?
Est-ce que votre compréhension de votre rôle dans la gestion de ce secteur est trop étroite?
Are the possibilities for impact wider than you had thought?
Est-ce qu'il y a des opportunités d'avoir un impact sont plus larges que vous avez?
And what more could you do? What could you do differently? What could you do better?
Et qu'est-ce que vous pourrez faire différemment ou mieux faire pour adresser les défis?
Okay. So I've made a big assumption here, and that's that we're all interested in sustainable development. And by that, I mean that all different stakeholders care about converting mineral capital into other forms of value that serve the interests of them, their organizations, and their beneficiaries.
Donc, son intervention repose sur l'hypothèse que tout le monde est concerné et tout le monde est soucieux du besoin de traduire des richesses des minéraux à d'autres richesses qui vont servir à un développement durable.
And it's not such a big assumption because we're given mandate to do this in all of these normative documents and frameworks that countries have signed up to, like the Africa Mining Vision, for example.
Et c'est cette hypothèse qui est sous-tendante dans tous les différents politiques et cadres internationaux, cette hypothèse qu'il faut traduire cette richesse du sous-sol non renouvelable pour servir un développement durable plus large.
So there's 4 viewpoints that I want us to focus on today to understand how we can harness artisanal mining's development potential.
Donc il y a 4 dimensions qu'elle aimerait souligner dans son intervention aujourd'hui afin de nous aider à réfléchir ensemble sur ce phénomène. Avec cela, je laisse les professionnels continuer. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Tara. Thank you very much, Tara. So the first is scale. And I should preface this by saying that this is as much about how to professionalize and formalize an ASM sector, because of course we expect that by doing that we can deliver sustainability. So these 4 dimensions, these 4 viewpoints for understanding the sector to act in it well are scale. Where are you intervening? At what level? Is it the right level? At all levels that you should be? Functions. Whose behavior are you trying to change? Are you trying to improve? How can we prime each position in this system, each role, so that it does its function optimally for delivering sustainability? Lenses. How are you seeing this sector? What values are you bringing to it? And what values matter to the others that you're dealing with so that you can find a way forward together? And then ultimately, when you understand these 3 things, knowledge, how are you deploying it to have impact? And what are the ways of doing that well and affordably? Let me start with scales. The point is that optimizing the mineral system for sustainability requires interventions at all levels. And by that, I mean at all supply chain tiers, but also from the individual to the organization, to the community, to the sector at large. It's not enough just to change a mining policy. You must cascade that down through institutional mandates and the job descriptions of the civil servants who have to enforce it. This diagram should give you a sense of what I mean. You have, it's not moved on. Sorry. You have the individuals who together comprise an organization in a community with others that also depend on that sector or are impacted by it, and multiple communities who together with the exporters comprise the sector at large. So when you intervene to make formalization happen, you need to unpack the sector to these components, these pieces, and think about what needs to happen at each of these to make change happen. And a really important piece that might get forgotten when you're looking at a national ASM sector is the market. The market can be a really strong ally in helping push things towards sustainability, or they can be a really strong hindrance, as we see in various commodities that we work in. I want to come at each of these scales in a little bit of detail, starting with the individual, then I'll come to organization, and then to the sector. What do we need to know or understand in order to have the individual empowered, be able to do to operate more sustainably? What really matters is who are these people, why are they mining or trading, what are their reasons, and how able are they to change? We must know these three things. And when you ask those three questions, you can unpack information about the miners. And here's an example from Ivory Coast in 2010, when I was here to work on a large mine, to do an impact assessment for the large mine on artisanal mining. Nicolas is taking a photo. He was working with me at the time. And we spoke to lots of miners at various sites, which were quite different as sites. And people selected to go to different sites because it suited them. There was something about their identity that made that site better, because of the type of mining that was possible, or because of the level of safety at that place, or its proximity to the mine. And we found that there were very different people mining. There was two major categories: allochthone, allogène, and then the autochtone. So the immigrants and the local residents. And there was another category that traversed both of those, which was women. We found cacao traders who were so in debt with their cacao business that they were mining and trading. We found women who were heads of households, widows, single parents, uneducated girls, professional miners who had come from Burkina Faso, very different people. If you want to have them formalize their activities, you have to have different strategies because they're coming from different positions. Let's talk about the organization. This is a tool that we developed to support the National Association of Jewelers in the UK, who, like you, are trying to deal with very small businesses and help them professionalize and formalize. Only they're downstream from you. And we realized that to do this, there's three main dimensions that you can take people along a pathway. Actually, in Britain, the first part of the pathway is compliance. You have to be legal and get your license to operate. The second part of the pathway is to make sure that as you're getting going with your business, eventually you become resilient. You're maximizing profit, you're managing risk, you can continue even when there are challenges around you. And then ultimately, to be sustainable, which means you're not just concerned with the risks that you face, but you're concerned with the risks that your actions as a business might pose to others, like miners using mercury, for example. Actually, in an artisanal mining context, I flipped it. In an artisanal mining context, people do business before they become formalized. People do business and they have viable business models, and then they formalize. It's a different order. If we understand this, then we can have tactics for intervening. And I should point out there are some organizations who are here today, like ARM, like PAC and Solidaridad, who do focus on this at the ASM level through initiatives like Fair Mind and Fair Trade, for example, and the Just Gold program. Let's talk about the sector. There's a lot of words on this, and I'm sorry that it's not in French. But this is a tool that we use at ELL when we do a situational analysis of an ASM sector. Down the side, you'll see different lenses, different things that we use, and we put the country in the box according to where it is. So on policy status, that's really about how enabling the policy environment is so that ASM can be formalized. Is the government tolerant of ASM? Does it criminalize ASM? Or does it see it as an opportunity and seek to enhance its economic potential and drive it as the basis for rural economic growth? Whichever one it is, it sits you somewhere on that spectrum. Human rights. How common are human rights violations? How egregious, how serious are those violations? Where does that put you? And you map a country on this. And you might find, for example, that Ivory Coast would have some ASM organizations in the yellow, in the middle, that are legal but perhaps informal because they haven't fully formalized every aspect of what they're doing yet. And they might have some in the criminal section because they're laundering money through it. what we find in the majority of countries is that most people sit on the illegal informal and the legal informal, the orange and the yellow. What we want to do when we formalize a sector is pull the whole sector, so the majority of miners are increasingly towards the green end of that. And once you map it and you know where you sit, where the majority of ASM are, you can look at the types of tools for helping you advance to the next level. I had some of these printed out yesterday in French and English, and if you would like copies, then do just ask me. Let's come to functions. So we've looked at the levels. Let's now talk about people's roles in the system. This little guy is the mineral system. I know it looks incongruous. Oh, you can't see him. I'm pressing the wrong thing. I'm so sorry. There he is. I need to find a name for him. When I look at a mineral system and I make sense of it, I look at the different functions within it. You have government that establishes the rule of law and enforces that law. You have business that's going about the business of doing business. You wouldn't need the rest if those two worked together perfectly and everything was hunky-dory. But we do need the rest. We need civil society to hold both government and business to account. We need them to be the watchdogs, and we need them to step in when there are grievances and help with those remedies. Like PACT does in Congo, for example, with the Comité Provincial de Suivi that happens there, the work they do through ITSI. We need development assistance, and that doesn't just mean donors, it also means experts, consultancies, dare I say, like us, that might come in and work with all the actors to help push these things forward. And then business needs assurance that the other people they're doing business with are achieving certain standards. All of these pieces of the system matter. When you come in to formalize a system and you just deal with government, you're not going to fix it. You have to think about all of these different functions. And all of us sitting here probably predominantly sit in one of these functions. How do we relate to each other? How can we learn about the others and how we can engage with them better? That's what I want to emphasize. And I'm going to pull out, I'm conscious of time, just two of these based on the conversations that I heard yesterday that I wanted to have you think differently about. It might be a bit uncomfortable, but just bear with me. Are governments law enforcers or human rights defenders? I'm asking this because the United Nations Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights assigns governments a duty to protect the human rights of its citizens. In Mongolia, the Swiss government, in a bilateral cooperation project with the government of Mongolia, have pioneered a human rights-based approach to the formalization of the ASM sector, and it works. It's very, very interesting, and I'm passionate about it because I was there in 2014, helping design the fourth phase, just when they were talking about introducing this. And in that fourth phase, they went all guns blazing to take a human rights-based approach. And when they did that, as a consequence, they managed to get not just a couple of hundred of kilograms of gold coming into the export channels and being exported legally, but 6 tons of gold within 2 years of really pushing this agenda came in legally. Of course, it was combined with some structural changes in law and policy. But this works. How does it work? Well, there's a blog that I did with Patience Singer, who's the director on the OECD site, and it's here, so when you get the presentations, you can look. And the Swiss project, the SAM project, is wanting to talk about this and share this information with people, so I really encourage you to contact them directly. And I don't have time today to go into the details, but the main summary of it is that it flips things on its head. Government agents move to become human rights defenders because they have a duty to protect, and they engage businesses to help make those businesses respect human rights, which is their responsibility to do so. Miners become stewards. Miners start to manage their impacts on society. One of my colleagues brought this concept to Central Africa, a colleague who works with ARM, and he tried it out in a Central African context. And he found when you began to speak to government agents about the impacts they could have on their fellow citizens as a public servant, then it was like an awakening, and they became very motivated in their jobs. It helped generate political will. This is interesting. I think it's worth exploring. The other thing I want to think about is a landscape approach to governing ASM. When I began this slide, I was thinking mostly about large-scale mining companies and how they just get the mineral rights that make sense from a minerals perspective. And they manage essentially that land. They are stewards of that mineral asset and the land on it, obviously in partnership with local communities there and the government. But actually, they're part of a bigger landscape. You take that concession and it's part of a bigger ecosystem, or it's part of a bigger community. International organizations like WWF and the World Bank, actually many conservation organizations, are now pushing what's called a landscape approach to how we manage natural resources. This is really important because it forces us to step out from just thinking about this as mining people and start talking to people in energy, in infrastructure, in health, in conservation. It forces us to take those multiple lenses and ways of seeing, and it can make interventions way more effective. It's also an opportunity for new forms of investment, and I want to highlight here my colleagues in the audience from Ubuntu Capital. They understand the potential when you take one sector and you work it in with other sectors. When you say, to make mining work, we have opportunities also in health, in uniform making, in agriculture. Can we seed fund all of those different pieces that link together and elevate the whole? Mining becomes the means for broader development in one integrated business model. And this way of thinking is happening with others in the sector too. Ubuntu is the investor, but there are mining companies that are also thinking this way. And I would bring your attention to the bottom one here, ASM, who operate in the region in Burkina Faso. We are supporting them on their sustainability and due diligence work. And they have a business model where the minerals are the means. The minerals generates the capital that they are then investing in other sectors, in agriculture, in rehabilitation of mine, restoration of soil. If we can expand our lens and step outside of mining for mining's sake, we can do so much more. It's complicated, and that's why we need more lenses. I'm going to skip the protection economies because I'll come to the GIFT project in a minute. Sam, you might recognize this place. You do? This is Koidu in Sierra Leone, where yeah, okay. And I wonder what you see when you see this. If you're an environmentalist, you would see a devastated landscape. If you're a health professional, you'd see malaria, bilharzia, and other problems. As a social scientist, as somebody that works on political economy, I look at this and I see, oh, who's doing what? What are the roles? Where's the guy that's protecting things? You know, who's the guy that's the watcher for the supporter? I see something else. But actually, we need all of these lenses to make sense of the situation and to transform it into something better. That's why the Intergovernmental Forum, their new guidance, talks about interministerial committees. That when you're establishing a process for formalizing the ASM sector, that you have to bring the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Labour into solving this. We need all of these different ways of seeing to fix this problem. I'm going to share something fairly personal, but I think this is useful for you. Well, I think it's useful. You may not agree. I've spent a long time figuring out why I care about the environment, why it's something that's always a piece of my work. And then I came to realize the reasons why I care are applicable to any dimension of the human reality, to business and to government and other things. And I realized that I care about this situation for these three reasons. The reasons of utility, justice, and beauty. Utility because I am a biological being. And if we keep doing this to the planet, then I won't have clean air to breathe, and I won't have clean water to drink, and I won't have access to wood or trees without fighting somebody to get them. So there's a utility aspect to this. I care about it because if I destroy it, or I'm complicit in destroying it, then my children won't be able to enjoy it, or have access to it, or use it. And that's about justice. And that's about justice across space and time, because when that forest is destroyed, it's also about the carbon impacts of not having a carbon sink. And the other reason I care about it is because of how it makes me feel. And I think that also matters. As human beings, we search meaning. As technicians, we spend all of our lives trying to justify things through rational frameworks of utility and justice. But actually, sometimes we love somewhere just because it's beautiful and how it makes it feel. And when you're working in supply chains, when you're working in gold or in the 3 Ts, you still have to think about these things, because Apple cares about design and beauty, because they sell that. Because Tiffany & Co. care about that. The people that we are delivering these minerals to, for them beauty matters too, and all of these 3 things. So if we take these 3 lenses onto a situation, it helps us interpret where somebody is coming from, what matters to them. And ultimately, it's when we reconcile these 3 values that I think we will build more sustainable futures. Knowledge. I'm going to flip through this quite quickly. We need to know what we're doing. We need to gather and mobilize knowledge, and we need to do that better. And we need to do it in ways that is resource efficient, affordable, value for money. And it has to have impact. Too many times I've worked on projects, and the report just sits on a shelf because there is no money for getting that information out to others. Too many times I've sat and had conversations, including last night with friends here, who are working on something that we're working on too, for 2 different people, duplicating and wasting money when we should be cooperating. We didn't know about these things happening. We need to talk more. We need to talk more, and we need to share more, and we need structures for doing that. The structures are things like this. These fora are wonderful. That's why those of us who were part of CHASM have fought so hard to have more ASM dialogues, and I'm so grateful to the organisers for doing that here, and I understand there's going to be something else in Paris in May. We need more of these forums. Debate and dialogue matter, and others are doing that. IAD, the Minamata Convention with the National Action Plans has dialogues. But we also need tools, and there's a real movement in the ASM sector to use technology and tools to rationalize what we're doing, to make it cheaper, to make it consistent, to raise standards, and to make it accessible. And that's a really good thing. And we need donors to continue to invest in that and to universalize these tools. To bring things to scale, we need to move from pilots to planet. We need to scale, and to do that we have to invest in knowledge sharing and communications. And my big ask to the donors here, please, is that in every project that we do for you on development, could we please have a budget line for communications and impact so that we can go and share that internationally? I want to finish with a tool that kind of encapsulates everything that we've been talking about. And it's a project that ELL has done with the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime, with very, very kind support from GIZ, who has been not just a donor, but a technical support throughout as well. This is the Golden Illicit Financial Flows Project. And we launched this in December 2015 in Vancouver, and we've had various events around the world speaking with stakeholders about whether or not a focus on how gold and the illicit financial flows are linked is helpful to the sector. And so I'm very proud today to launch our Follow the Money toolkit for mapping illicit financial flows in the sector, and also our case study of using this in Sierra Leone that has raised some quite interesting findings about how financial flows are barriers to formalization in Sierra Leone. I want to just share with you, to conclude on this, I have 2 more slides, why this matters, why we need to look at illicit financial flows as a barrier to formalization. Actually, it was in 2011 when I was doing work with Stephen Van Boxtel and Ruby Weinberg for PRAD in Central African Republic and in Liberia. And we were trying to figure out how to get diamond buyers to buy more directly from the miners. And we really were looking at the dealers. And we came to understand how very important the dealers are at dictating how people mine, where they mine, and in controlling whether or not they can formalize. And so here are the 3 realizations that led to the GIFT project. The first is that mining doesn't begin when a shovel hits the ground. Mining begins with the money. You've got to buy the shovel, and you've got to get to the mine site, and you need food when you're there. The second is that gold is a financial instrument, and we see this in West Africa a lot. People are using it to facilitate their import-export businesses. People use it as a form of storing wealth. But also, people use it to launder money. And that's happening in this region. And the third is that formalization doesn't happen in a vacuum. What is here already works. And if you want to change that, to formalize it, you better know the vested interests who care about keeping it the way it is and work with them. I just want to flag for you the OECD FAQs. Yesterday, people were talking about legalization, formalization. If you're stuck on what all of these terms means, please use this document. It's extremely useful. So I want to thank you for your time. You can get these products outside. There are some business cards that have a QR code that allow you to download them. You can email me. And I look forward to discussing things with everybody in the break and at lunch. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Estelle, pour cette présentation.
Well, Estelle, thank you very much for this presentation that helped us to take some distance as compared to yesterday, because sometimes when we are in the details on what's happening on the ground, it's good to take some distance and see clearly what things are all about. And I think that this analytic framework is very relevant to what we discussed yesterday. First of all, I'm trying to see the relevance of all the levels of the activity as something very important, and to each level there are constraints and motivation why a small-scale miner is doing what he's doing. Why is it that a go-between or a buyer is motivated? And without all this information, we can't have a real and effective rationalization plan that will work. And we also keep in our mind this idea, which consists in trying to identify the function of each of the actors. It's not about limiting ourselves to the perspectives of the government, but also to see the perspective on the part of the experts in the private sector and civil society. And the third element that we keep from that presentation is that idea of the situation about whereby it's hard to see things from a distance or hard to see it from a closer distance. It depends on how we perceive things and how we judge them. And forces at a state that focuses on the enforcement of the law. It is their way of seeing things. The law is there. The role is to enforce the law. But for the civil society organizations, the most important is something else, something different. It's not necessarily the law, maybe human conditions, human law, human rights, and for the private sector or the stakeholders in this sector have a different way of seeing things. For instance, yesterday we saw clearly that sometimes we have small-scale miners who are there, and when the companies come, they ask them, what are you doing on our site? It's like it is their right to be there and kick everybody out. And so all this leads us to think that justice is something very important. The development and utilization of all these resources to the benefit of the population or the actors. And so this leads us to reflections that will lead us to a clearly defined strategy. But we first of all need a discussion to set the balance between the priorities. And lastly, I think that there is also the relevance of generating and disseminating the knowledge in the sector. And this is something that we will see there. So many cases of best practice which are documented. And the most important in this kind of meetings is the sharing of information and experience for the way forward. And as was presented early on, we have cases of analysis that will help us not to be led astray. It will just help us to reflect and see how we can look at this phenomenon more constructive manner, in the most constructive and objective manner. And the last thing is the need not to change things, because there are some practices that are there, even though they are illegal, but at least there is an organization of a sector, and there is a need for a formalization process that needs to start with all what is there. And because stopping something suddenly is always very difficult, even if the state is involved. Everything needs to start with a clear understanding of what is there, and also an analytic framework that will take into account all the actors and all the people involved in a more pragmatic way. Thank you, Esther. Even though it was sounding a bit theoretical, I think that it was very instrumental to help us to take some distance and see how, as an international consultant who's been working for companies and the state and various organizations, will formulate recommendations on how to organize the sector. Thank you very much for that. Now let's move on to the next presentation. And if we have enough time, we'll set some time for the discussions. If not, so without any further ado, I will call Patrick Eating to come to give an overview of the European Union regulations.
Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the introduction. I think that this morning's presentation was very useful to set the stage. The EU is a donor that has been committed in this sector, and they recalled the commitment on mining, governance, and issues relating to diamond and gold. We have a number of programs that we're supporting, and we're very happy to do that, providing various stakeholders and expertises. We're talking about the OECD program in support to civil society and NGOs, and the element that were mentioned yesterday have to do with the regulatory aspect and partially. And that part is very important, but the EU regulation on the import of such mineral resources was very important. So I was asked to give a short presentation on the new EU regulation on gold import, and what are the implications that you can imagine. I will just give some background. It started since 2014, and it's an exercise that takes some time. And why? That there are some consultations with the private sector, civil society, and the producing countries, and the industry, and the various stakeholders. They help to the development of that new regulation. There was a communication since 2014, and we hope that by the first semester 2017, we'll have a regulation completed. I'm still remaining on the first slide to give you the background. For us, in fact, it is a pact that covers 1,800 companies that are producers and consumers of the 4 minerals. So it is a huge pact with the corporations, and there was an analysis on the refineries for these mineral resources, and today the situation in terms of due diligence, which is a bit the objective of this regulation, is still low. We've been talking about 16% for the minerals tantal, tungsten, and ethane. And for gold, we have 40%. So the due diligence level or rate is still very low. These are a few elements on the regulation. First of all, due diligence. Of course, the idea is to have an approach on the channel. Mineral supply chain and the import to European Union countries. And as you can see on the diagram, the idea is to have, in fact, a two-level action on the traders and the refineries, as well as gold producers. And so these are the companies that import on the European market that are targeted and are affected by the due diligence. And what do we mean by due diligence? I think that the presentation of OECD will give more details. In fact, it's a continuous process and proactive process on the supply chain and the traceability of the production from the site, and everything that has to do with transport, trade, down to the export or import. Now, who is affected by the due diligence? In fact, all the companies are affected or are targeted, and there is a kind of nuance, a clear sensitiveness to artisanal sectors where the standards are a bit harder to put in place. There's another issue on the small-scale miners. The negotiators and local importers, exporters, and other actors. There is something on the second item, which is the overall implementation that covers all the countries. And our discussion as part of this workshop focuses on conflict zone countries and high-risk zones. The high-risk zones are areas where governance matters are minor, where there might be serious governance problem along the chain, or it may have an impact, or the regulation might notably have an impact on these high-risk zones, because the due diligence will be maybe more demanding when it comes to gold and the three other mineral resources. So there will be a focus or a need to show more in the traceability process when the mineral resources are coming from these high-risk zones. Now, the interest here has to do with human rights, torture, forced labor, and child labor. And there's also a dimension on the support to non-state armed forces or groups, and also all things relating to taxations or extortion, or illegal extortion of money or taxation. All these elements are part of the regulation which the private company should communicate and provide objective element or information. The third item is that this regulation follows 5 steps of the OECD guide. I mean, everything that has to do with management system, risk evaluation. And on the management system, it's about communicating the fact that this company has a clear policy on the supply of its minerals. Risk management for us is a very important and relevant element. I mean, the countries, many companies, based on some agreement, must inform on their providers. And so if there are some doubts, we need to initiate discussions with these suppliers or change them. And you will have a strong impact on gold exports. For artisanal production, I said it earlier on, due diligence is less demanding here because it requires some cost, and it's not always easy to put in place such thing, given the fact that it is a more or less formal sector, but some elements need to be taken into account in this regulation, which to us is very important, which means that we need to make a census of the mining sites, particularly gold mining site, and also the extraction conditions, the working conditions of the miners, and everything that has to do with handling and transport of the minerals extracted, can also the formal and informal aspect relating to it. It helps us to better implement that regulation that will become a lever to address all the problems that may appear in the local governance for gold export. Now, what is the EU certification for gold import? We base ourselves on the OECD guide, and recently we've been talking about, I think Friday, Wednesday we talked about the training again. There are good practices that are there today, and the idea is to use the guide to come up with a good best practice guide, and it was agreed to with the private sector, but we need to be flexible with time, and it's one of the elements, essential element of the regulation. The second is more institutional. The idea is that each member state of EU has its specificity or has its authority that can perform control activities. We can ask the importers or exporters to prove the origin or traceability of the gold. The other idea is to have transparency respected, which means clear list of refineries that are known to be responsible ones. So all the companies that are on the white list will be published, and we will highlight the fact that in the fragile zone, that the fragile zone are more appear more, and also the application stretch up to 2021. And in addition to this, regulation, the EU want to come up with some responsible measures, which mean that they need to publish the indicative zone a list of the high-risk zones. And in fact, it's part of the supportive measures to ensure that there is more transparency at international level. And so that guide of the OECD will have to communicate on all the measures in place as well as strategies to ensure that there is traceability of these four minerals from the production to the purchase. And also we'll open a window where we can find all this information in a more direct manner. One of the most important items that appear here is that small companies, given the fact that there are some costs involved to put in place all the system, it makes things difficult to put that regulation in place. And the regulation, the way it's produced today, is that 95% of the import are covered by the regulation, which means that there's a substantial part of the market, and there are small importers or companies may come on a voluntary basis. So the idea is to have a transparent database for these small companies and some specific support to small companies. We may have some more simplified guide to be put in place. Parallel to the regulation, the EU decided to put in place some supportive measures to put in place to implement this regulation, and I think that is one of the reasons why we were interested in participating in this workshop is to promote the OECD guide, and we'll come back to it. There will be a presentation by OECD on that, and there are some supportive measures that have been put in place in Great Lake regions regarding all that has to do with gold extraction governance, and also in West Africa, particularly Burkina Faso and Cote d'Ivoire and Latin America. You will see all these things. I think Colombia is also part of the countries. There will be a more institutional support in the preparation of that guide by OECD, not only from the producing countries, the processing countries, and also countries who are on the list of the buyers. And recently, European Union launched a partnership to create some discussion forum among the actors. It's a public-private partnership with member states which are interested, and also some private sector companies, NGOs, and civil society organizations. This is how the EU is trying to engage discussion and exchange and sharing of ideas on these topics. So this is the end of my presentation. Maybe you may need some information. If you post this reference on a web link, you may find the documents that are at the basis of this new regulation. It's a joint communication by the Council and the Parliament that was developed in 2014, and there's a draft regulation. It is based on that the new regulation that will be produced and adopted. Thank you very much.
Merci, Patrick. Je pense que j'aimerais juste vous poser une petite question.
Well, thank you, Patrick. I would like to ask you a question. You presented the framework for this regulation. The ambassador also referred to that new regulation in his speech yesterday. What could be the short or medium and long-term impact of this regulation in the region, in the sub-region, and other regions? In fact, what was mentioned in the speech of the ambassador is the need for traceability. I mean, the fact that there are some areas where governance is more difficult and traceability is difficult to establish. And the consequence is that companies which engage in this due diligence process may tend to go and support the traceability process or have other sources of gold supply. So these are strategies that could be put in place. The idea is to support that process at local, national, but also international levels, because the objective is to improve these areas of governance that are considered to be fragile. So on the one side, on the one hand, you can see refineries on the downstream of the chain, which or who may refuse to consider some sources of supply or work with supportive measures of the EU to gradually align these mineral resources on the laws. In fact, the idea is that the companies put in place all the control systems, and there is a training aspect to take into consideration. And one of the results would be that some of the companies may decide not to work anymore with some suppliers because of lack of traceability of the gold, and at the same time work to ensure that the suppliers that they have already have more idea on the items that have been mentioned. I mean, the production site, the working condition, the legal or illegal taxes that could be introduced into the guide. The idea is not to punish, but to see what is in place and the measures that will help reduce the risk which the stakeholders should take into account. Thank you very much, Patrick. So I think that this presentation has helped us a lot to make us understand how the due diligence guide of OECD can be put in place, has been put in place and been adopted and even becoming a constraint for many actors on the value chain, in the value chain, and also therefore it's important for the sub-region to take this into account. OECD will later come and give more information on that. Now we will come back to our sub-region. I will invite Mr. Sanga from Niger to share with us his experience in the export of gold as part of this activity. Thank you.
Morning, dear. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to take you through the experience of Niger in ASM through different method used, as well as presenting the related challenges. This presentation is outlined 5 points. This element that will give you the summary or the highlight of the activities in my country. Artisanal mining in Niger ranges from the semi-precious stone to the precious stones such as the gold, and the mining of development minerals such as industrial minerals, the example of salt and so on. These are, and all goes into the artisanal and small-scale mining. There are several challenges which don't enable him to play his role in the economic development of the countries, and this is also a means of livelihood for most of people. The country is divided into 8 bigger groups. So the box are the place where the mining ASM is taking place. We have the Liptako, the Aïr, and the Shadow. These are the location of intensive ASM activities. How is the ASM handled in my country? It's through legal and institutional framework established. So the frameworks encompasses the mining policy, the regulatory and legal framework, which are important for private investors, and the constitution of the country. Which gives a focus on the mining activities, extractive activities. So mining resources are viewed as national wealth, and other instruments and texts that come to complement and buttress those institutions when it comes to the management of the ASM at a national level, and in view of having a sound management of the ASM, we have adopted a code of best practices in 2004, which applied to all people living in the field, in the site, whether miners, artisanal miners, traders, or anybody engaged in related activities. So there is one entity who is implementing all these elements, this aspect, supervising or supervisory aspects of the activities. In 2004, a national directorate was created, which directorate is responsible for, is caring for the ASM, rolling out program and project in that context, and also enforcing the text accordingly. In 2014, a technical committee was set up to optimize that activity. That committee consists of the different representatives from the President's office to the Prime Minister's office, the Ministry of Mining, and all other relevant ministries, the governorship, the prefecture, regional and prefectural department or directorate, NGOs, donors, and so on. Like I said, that committee was set up in 2014. But at the regional level, we have set up regional directorate are set up, exists to monitor the activity, but they are not posted in all the regions. But in the region where they are established, they are playing a monitoring role. So how is the minerals mined and processed? They're using different models, different methods for collection, for excavating, sometimes using explosive and heavy equipment. The treatment, the processing goes from the cleaning, the crushing, and so on. And through the different pictures, I will show you evidences. This is a place where explosives are used, subsurface. This is manual crushing. Manual grinding, and this is the washing. So the washing. The washing product, this is how things happen. Put cyanide, water and mineral in. So 1 week later, they will collect the product and continue the treatment. So these are the zinc capped in gold. They are checking it. Has it yielded some things? Continue treatment using nitric acid to grind it, see how they're working. No personal protection equipment, no goggles, no gloves. They are used doing it. I cannot bear it. This is a decantation phase. So, burning it in order to remove the waste and the dust. So with all these methods and the treatment method, depending on the regulation, we manage to collect few quantities through a committee which is established on each site, which is supported by the state budget, financing that committee, which will tour the different field, the different site, because we have identified some deposits, some sites which are a larger site. This is where the mixed team will go on a monthly basis in order to register the production, provide guidances and advices. So we've been able to have this volume. 412, this what we get in 2012. But after there are smuggling, illegal channels, that is also a reality in our country. As a whole, the quantity collected is insignificant compared to the realities in the ground. We have several challenges. In several sites, but the public administration is not present in all the different sites. We don't know the number of the miner. We don't know the quantity of production. We have no control on the import or the export channel, the commercialization marketing channel, and also no control of all the elements that are registered concerning the environment and so on. Another challenge is that different miners from different nationalities, especially from Chad, from Nigeria, will come and mine in the different sites without permit, without authorization. Also the use of the heavy equipment, explosives, with chemicals that have harmful and serious impact on the environment. So, also the mining which is taking place near the households adversely or harmfully impacting on the people's lives. So what we are battling in order to mitigate those challenges, we built on what Burkina Faso is doing to establish an economic public institution, public economic institution with a legal entity, turn the artisanal authorization to the ASM authorization permits, organize the miners in the cooperative. We continue to sustain the work as we've already started a few years ago. We'll continue to get them organized. Identify a mechanism to have more registered miners and have the miners declare the actual production. So we are on the good track in order to come up with the best and the appropriate mechanism. And those who are already working in the site for which a permit is already granted, issued, will make them leave the area, Then involve the local stakeholders, meaning chief of villages, religious leaders, and the local authorities in management. In conclusion, those challenges should be met if we want to move forward. And in this regard, and soon, we, by the end of this month, a validation workshop will be organized in order to take into account some security supervisory aspect and move to the next step of developing the sector. Thank you.
I thank you very much, Mr. Sanga. I think that it was very interesting to see all these images that made the way you work there very much concrete. People who don't put protection glasses against acid or other chemicals that are later. I think that we have a lot of questions. We'll ask your leniency so that we can continue with the next presentation. If we are left with enough time at the end, we will then open up for Q&A session. That being said, I will ask Mr. Adjo from the Benin Republic to come for his presentation on the Beninese experience. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor to give you an overview on what is happening in the gold extraction in Benin, and I will focus on the challenges. First of all, I will show the strategies in place to organize artisanal mining of gold, and this framework gives to you, this map gives to you the region in the country where gold mining, artisanal gold mining is more extensively developed. And it is in the northern part of the country where we have the Takra area. Now, what are the type of mineralization? We have three types. First of all, we have the alluvion site, which are most of the time targeted. And we also have alluvion site, which are on the hillside, and we have Felonian site, which are operated by the digging of well or big holes by those operators. Now, what is the what's the magnitude? In fact, from 1994 to 1995, more than 10,000 gold miners have been recorded in an area of 5 kilometers diameter. And in last year, 2016, there was a rush for gold, let's say 400 kilometers far from Cotonou in the northern part of the country, and more than 5,000 gold miners went to that site, and today it is protected by the gendarme services because it will be part of the gold mining corridor that will be later attributed to the artisanal miners. And the population working in these areas are cross-border, let's say, border populations from the neighbor countries, and the institutional framework that was put in place to organize this activity is clear. I will not expatiate on the central organization of the service or department. I will talk about the agencies that are in charge of the organization. The legislative and regulatory framework, in fact, we have the mining code, but there is a decree on the regulation of artisanal mining, and it is a ministerial order that was taken in 2002, and that decree specifies that the mining, artisanal mining, to be authorized require the exploitation authorization, or that is a document signed by the minister, and according to that document you need to have an extraction register, sale register, and consumables statistic, which is not always obvious. And regarding artisanal gold mining, we took a ministerial order in 2004 that says that the authorization to exploit a site will cover only half of an hectare, and that paper is valid for 3 years and renewable. And the order, ministerial order, specifies the material authorized and forbids the use of substances like explosives and later chemicals. Now, what are the agencies in place to organize that activity? I talked about departmental services, and there is a service that was established for the major gold mining sites in 2017, in 1997, and we also opened a brigade in 2003, and they work with the Federation of Artisanal Gold Miners, and this federation is supporting us in the regulation of the artisanal gold miners' activity, and they understood that it is good, and we understood that it is good to work with that federation. Now, by way of strategy, we identified a number of corridors, and we already limited them, and they are dedicated to artisanal gold extraction activities. And the limitations that we gave to that corridor is based on a number of requirements: the alluvium or alluvium mineral, and the site should not be too deep, and possibly we should have the presence of artisanal mining activity. And when we realize that there is a gold mining site which doesn't have a permit, we go and we define it as confined to a corridor. When we are working on organizing this, we ensure that all the actors respect the rules, and most of the time for the washing of the gold, the women are the most involved. And when it comes to industrial production, it's more structured and better organized than when it is that we deal with groupings, because the groupings are more individualistic, and there is a monthly note, a bulletin that gives at least more information on the production, and we discovered that sometimes it's not that faithful. And when we compared it with the others, we saw that there was a lot to do. And we also organized awareness campaign and periodic meeting with artisanal miners to take into account the list of the requests and see that if the list that were forbidden could be given to them, so that we can open a corridor on those sites. In spite of all this, there are challenges, as was mentioned by my colleague from Niger. So we need to establish collection centers and also and there are collectors that we don't really control. They come to collect and go to sell it to the purchase center in Cotonou. As my colleague from Niger said, we need to transform the artisanal authorization to semi-industrial authorization. We also need to identify mechanisms that can help the administration to have production declaration, and we also need to reduce the illegal mining rate, and the document should be simple and accessible to the artisan miners. The groupings, as I said, have some operational problems, so we need to see how we can reorganize them. We also need to coordinate the intervention of the various state-owned agencies, because there is lack of coordination there, and also we need to promote the possible cohabitation between the ASM and LSM. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much for your contribution, sir. We could see that there is also a number of challenges, as we saw in other countries. And now, without any further ado, I'm inviting Lou Marshall for a brief presentation of the OECD Due Diligence Guide, which was used as the central subject for the training, and will also give us more information on the next panel after the break. Thank you, Tara. Many among you were here on Monday, and we are very happy that we were able to discuss with you on Wednesday. Now, let me go quickly to enable all the participants to have a clear picture on what the OECD guide on due diligence is, and also show the various programs that are being implemented all over the world to enable its implementation. Very quickly, OECD is an organization that was established in 1961 that has now 35 member states. It is an organization that works towards preparing reflection report and provide advice to government regarding globalization, its economic impact, and one of the characteristics is that they work with the private sector, civil society, and the trade union in a more holistic manner. So it helps us to be in touch with the realities in the areas of these stakeholders. And we are based in Paris. We have some representations in the world, but we don't have any in Africa yet. But later in the future, we plan to do so. Now, to go to the specifics, as explained on Wednesday, OECD is an organization that is open to free trade, and the idea is to foster investment all over the world and trade and trade-offs. And I think that it is a vehicle for development and generation of resources and creation of jobs and knowledge. And there are many positive factors that are always targeted. But also, I would say that mining extraction, industrial, artisanal, sometimes can be associated with human rights violation, money laundering, and financing of armed groups or terrorist groups. And it is an organization which is not specific to Africa. They focusing more on Africa. In fact, that sector in Africa is common to many other countries in the world, South Asia, Latin America, and also we have a situation of Ukraine where we have coal mines that are controlled by separatist groups. It is a guide with recommendations that are applicable to all mining resources. We started working on tantal, tin, and gold, and I will explain quickly why. But from the beginning, it was agreed to by all the member states of OECD and other states who were not part of OECD that agreed that this is applicable to all the human mineral resources, and we have a work that is ongoing for the implementation of these guides that will target some 30 other mineral resources. So it's the work that will take many years, some dozens of years. And you are well informed that in Cote d'Ivoire, with the Kimberley process, that the demand for a responsible extraction of mineral is not new. It dates back to the year 2000, when there was focus on artisanal diamond and mineral resources extraction in the northern part of the country, and that demand on the consumers, from the consumers, was extended to other resources, notably through the UN report on DRC that made a link between gold extraction and where armed groups were involved. This is why we focus on these 4 mineral resources, and this is the strong collaboration that we have been having with Central African countries for years. And we have all this consideration in regulatory and legal documents all over the world. In the US and the European Union, as Patrick said, there is a law that has just been adopted in France, which is called the right to vigilance. And so they need to establish a vigilance plan and see the impact at global level. So it is in a tight connection with what OECD has been doing, and a lot is being done in China with national authorities and other actors to reflect on the regulation regarding the import of the 4 substances mentioned by the European Union. Two main objectives for this international standard. The first is to provide to the companies a number of specific recommendations, and we talked about it on Wednesday, to enable them to understand the supply chains which has to do with the various commercial partners and see if they are linked to armed group financing or they are involved in human rights violation. And the second is to promote investment and trade, responsible trade in the producing countries, but not any type of investment. It should be a responsible investment which is aware of the negative impact that this can have. So it is the central objective of our exercise here, because the focus of OECD and United States of America is that this activity should be an engine for economic growth without any negative impact on the environment and the population. It is a standard that covers all the companies that are in the value chain. It is not only for the countries, producers this standard does not apply to companies that are in producing countries. All the exporters, all the importers, the buyers, they are all involved. All the companies that process mineral resources and those who use it. And there was, and that matter should be applied by all the countries involved. There is no focus on production zones. This is why, as I said, we've been working with Central Africa, West Africa, Latin America in production zone. We've been working with Emirates, China, and Turkey for transformation or processing, and we're working with US and EU for consumption. And it is a 5-stage framework, and in the guide you'll find recommendations that are specific to the position of the company in the value chain. We are not expecting the same from a go-between who is close to the well, or a company which is in Germany, which is very far from the extraction site. So it is adapted to the size of the company. We're talking about SMEs that we find it hard to implement the due diligence. We cannot have the same requirement for an SME of 5 people than an SME that has more than 100 people. We are not expecting all this to be implemented very quickly. All transparencies can be done within 6 months only. The most important is that everybody will decide to implement the recommendations, and gradually they will try to demonstrate that there is a deep understanding of all the content of the guide. And it will take some years. Our program is only 5 years old, but we have recorded impressive progress at global level and in the Great Lake regions, but we still have many years of work ahead. There are some complementary and practical measures that help to implement that due diligence and to optimize cooperation between the various companies in the value chain. The objective is to accumulate information disseminated to the benefit of all the actors in the value chain. This is to illustrate that it applies to all the aspects of the value chain. Mining companies, artisans, bargainers or traders, refineries, banks, and the jewelry industry. So this affects the recycling sector. So we have some provisions in the guide that ensure that the investors are not cheated in the process. And the refinery stage is very important for us because it is at that level in the chain that an independent control by a third party should be performed each year. I mean, there's an auditor that comes every year to do an inspection of the refineries, ask questions to those companies, and see how they can implement the OECD guide. I would like to assure you that this presentation will be made available to all the participants. I'm going quickly, but you have time to read it when you get home. And this is a diagram that is in the OECD report that will come out at the end of March, and that shows the complexity of the gold supply chain from West Africa to other regions, and it illustrates all the complex mechanisms for the import, export, and re-export with some tax evasion schemes that will help to control some tax measures applicable from producing countries to buyers. This is why it's very important to have this progressive approach in the time and see requirements that are reasonable. I forgot to specify a very important point. The OECD guide was negotiated with the private sector and civil society, so all the recommendations in that guide were validated by the representatives of the those parties at the international level. It's not that the OECD single-handedly did this. We work in collaboration with all these groups. It's more than 200 pages. We took the opinion of practitioners and experts. So this is how the OECD guide is structured. We talked about it earlier. There is a policy model for a responsible value chain that explains the risks that companies are to identify. And this is clearly explained on gold. And I would like to say that in that document, there is a particular section at the end on that document on artisanal mining. And that guide is the first international standard that has provided for the economic contribution of the artisanal mining sector, which means that all the stakeholders must support the formalization and legalization of the artisanal mining to ensure that there's also sustainable contribution to the development of the country's economics. And we have a roadmap which is specified in that document. As we said, it is there was a document that was available on Wednesday that specifies clearly the expectations on international buyers, and I would like to say that you are not alone in this business, you the producers. There is a lot of pressures on international buyers, and we'll have time to talk about all this during the panel session. This is a schematic description of the five-stage process of the refinery. In fact, we take the information, we analyze it, if we find a risk, we try to alleviate the risk, and after that, we publish information. So it is a continuous cycle. It is not a one-off operation. The same applies to a company which permanently try to revisit and gives values to its operations. So the advantage of that document is to see how to improve the analysis of the risk involved in that process. And there are two scenarios here where a company identifies a risk. In most of the cases, the company is asked to alleviate that risk, to put in place an alleviation strategy to ensure that this risk will disappear. And there are two scenarios. When the risk is very important, then the international standard will ask the risk to the company to stop everything like the worst form of child labor and also direct or indirect financing of armed groups or terrorists. So if you see that your supplier is financing a non-state armed force or armed group, or it is, if it's an armed group that is a regular armed group, then there are some information that helps you to remove the risk. And you can get in touch with the Defense Ministry and tell them that, okay, one of my suppliers, or one of the export is controlled by a colonel in the army in violation of the national provisions. Our implementation program has been on since 2012, and more than 500 organizations participate. Big organizations, multinationals, and electronic magnates, those who produce your computers or your phones, participate in this implementation program. And the bulk of our activity is the awareness and training and development of practical tools, development of practical solutions to specific problems that were raised by the private sector. I will not go into details, but we're trying, as we possibly can, to take into account the problems faced by our various actors, and also ensure that the framework is well understood by everybody and be harmonized by all the stakeholders. And of course, we do all what we can to foster the promotion of responsible investment. Every week we have a working session of 2 to 4 5 days in Paris, and we have a workshop with the World Bank that will focus on mining, artisanal mining, and we're planning to have a workshop for West Africa. You all are cordially invited. We would like to have representation from the state in the sub-region to continue the discussion that we have started here. An active participation of the private sector, as I earlier said, is there. Most of the time, start from the refinery stage because they are controlled by the industries. We have the representative of the Association for the Gold Trade at international level. It will come to give more explanation. This is the mapping of the implementation. In Central Africa, there is a serious involvement of the states in 2011-10 through the Lusaka Declaration, which expressed the adoption of the 12 member states of that OECD document as a relevant document, and we also have the reaction from the United States and the member countries of OECD ensure that that guide is will be disseminated effectively. There are some initiatives in China, and I explained on Friday, Wednesday, we'll be able to give color to West Africa to testify your adherence to that international program. Cooperation with the European Union, I would like to add that all the activities that we have been conducting as part of this program are sponsored voluntarily by the European Union and many other member states, particularly France, as regards West Africa. Cooperation with international organizations, our team is not big, so we try to identify partners all over the world depending on the thematic issues that we address. You'll see many logos here, the UN, UNICRE, Customs Organization, Interpol, ILO, all these groups work with them to ensure that our work is well conducted. The interest for the government. I discussed this when I came to Abidjan. These slides are available, but it's very important for the government, which are not the first recipient of our recommendations, understand their role in that mechanism and the benefit for them. The more information on the value chain, the easier it will be for the government to control the trade and the activities in the country. And at international level, it helped them to increase the positive reputation of the country. And sometimes, because if there's a reputation that a zone is not well controlled, then government will know and be mobilized to go and control or organize that zone. And at national level, it helped to provide a better control of artisanal production of mining resources, and the regional cooperation criteria are also very important, and we are encouraged by the quality of the debate that we've been having since Wednesday. There is a focus on artisanal mining, and we sufficiently talked about this. So the key point, the essential participation, the participation of government is very essential, even if the standard is a voluntary implementation standard for the companies. We have realized that the government wanted to make that standard a compulsory standard if they were not satisfied with the quality of the implementation by the company. This is what we have realized over the recent year in Europe, in Africa, and also a better understanding of the stakes regarding artisanal mining. We will not say that it is our standard that helped there, but all the discussion that we have been having for the past 5 years through the fora helped positively. The next stage is, as I said, there will be a high-level meeting in Paris in West Africa, and all the states participating in this workshop are invited. We will send additional information later. We're still discussing with the UTACO Gurma Authority, which is represented here, to organize a similar workshop in Burkina Faso. In the third quarter of the year, we would also like to launch an original study on ASM and the associated risk to understand the risk of human rights violation and financing of illegal armed group and terrorism in sub-region. And we'll also try to translate all of this material in local languages to ensure that this is disseminated to local communities. So this is our action plan for the year 2017, in cooperation with the member state of the Liptako Kurma authorities, Burkina Faso, Mali, and also Cote d'Ivoire, if we are able to make some progress here, given the fact that there are so many flows of persons and material as discussed over the last day. And here you can see the link that will lead you to our website where we have all the necessary materials and our two contacts that will help you to continue the discussion online. Thank you very much. I think that it's now time for a coffee break. I will leave the MC on that.
It's time for a coffee break. I would like to apologize to the House because we didn't have time for discussion. The panel to come will be more interactive, and I hope we'll be able to spare time and to collect the contribution and feedback from the House.